Welcome everybody to Geotab's online training. Thank you so much for joining us today for Tuesday's talk. And today we have Vic with us, and he's going to share with us all about the new mandate for the ELD. And he's going to give us all of those 500 pages all in an hour. So let's see how we do with that. We will post this for you. We also have a white paper that Vic has written. He's just updating. It should be posted by the end of this week. So we're going to try and help you in any way that we can, not only to meet the mandate, but to understand it better. So please reach out in any way that you possibly can and we'll help you out with that. All right, with that, I am going to pass it over to Vic. So Vic, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Hi everyone, my name is Vic Sridhar and I'm a solutions engineer at Geotab, and I specifically focus on hours of service. And today I'll be talking about the ELD mandate. So let's start off by defining what an ELD is. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it already, but I'm going to say it anyway. ELD stands for Electronic Logging Device. So an electronic logging device is a device that's going to be attached to a commercial motor vehicle to synchronize with the engine and record hours of service. The ELD is going to facilitate a lot more accurate readings of the driver's activity by providing something called snapshots throughout the driver's day, and I'll get into what snapshots exactly mean. So let's start off by defining who needs to use these ELDs. So it's really any driver who currently maintains paper records of duty status for 8 days or more during any 30-day period. These are the drivers that are going to have an ELD. Today's rule does allow some limited exceptions. Some notable ones are drive-away, tow-away operations. So any drivers who operate in this circumstance are not required to use an ELD, provided the vehicle driven as part of the shipment. Another set of drivers who will be exempted are drivers who operate a commercial motor vehicle that is older than model year 2000. And the reason for this is we simply cannot get the engine data out of these vehicles that's required to create these duty status records. And third, drivers who use paper records of duty status for not more than 8 days during any 30-day period. So anybody who uses paper records of duty status for less than 8 days, these drivers are exempted. Here's a little pictorial overview of what an ELD is and what are the inputs and outputs. So on the left side, you'll see the driver and motor carrier are manual inputs going into the ELD. There's also measurements and sensed signals, and I'll get into that in a little bit, that are required for the ELD to monitor its compliance. On the output side, there's self-monitoring, there's internal processing, event recording, display, standard output file, data transfer. So display is the display to the driver to allow certain prompts and things like that. There's the standard output file, and this is where it'll be transferred over to an officer during a DOT inspection. It'll be shown to the driver, and it can be sent to the motor carrier as well. So just to compare, currently as we stand today, there's only one compliant device, and that's called an AOBRD, an automatic onboard recording device. This rule was actually published in 1988. There's been some minor revisions since then, but for the most part, this is the compliant device that is allowed today. And this is what all the vendors out there who are complying with the FMCSA's regulations, this is the device that they have today. I'm gonna go over what the AOBRD rules were and compare that with what the new ELD mandate is going to be. So the 1988 AOBRD rule said that the device has to be integrally synchronized. They never really defined what that meant. Now they really dig deeper into it. They say in order to be integrally synchronized, the device must interface with the CMV engine's ECM and automatically capture engine power status, vehicle motion status, miles driven, engine hours. Like I said before, CMVs that are older than model year 2000 are exempted. Recording location information. With the AOBRD regs, they simply said it was required at every change of duty status, manual or automated. So this would be like at a drive log, on duty, not driving log, sleeper berth, or off duty. Now they get a little bit more specific. Previously I was talking about snapshots, and these are what the snapshots are. We require an automated entry at each change of duty status. So that's the same as the AOBRD regulations. But now they take it one step further. At every 60-minute interval, while the CMV is in motion, you need to record a snapshot. At engine on and off instances, these events need to be recorded. And at the beginning and end of personal use and yard moves. The graph grid display, it was never required for the AOBRD. All they really needed was the time and sequence of duty status changes. Now they say an ELD must be able to present a graph grid of driver's daily duty status. Changes either on a display or on a printout. And if you're familiar with Geotab Drive at all, this is something that we already do. We know that drivers use paper logs and graph grids. So this is something that was designed from day one within the app. So as I go through some of these things that are required for the ELD mandate, you'll see that we already cover some of these items. HOS driver advisory messages. It was never addressed in the AOBRD regulations. Now they say HOS limits notification is not required, so these would be violations. However, unassigned driving time / miles, this warning must be provided upon login. So let's first touch on that first item, the violations. Currently, as we stand today, an ELD is now required to actually tell the driver when they're approaching a violation or when they're driving in violation. However, Geotab Drive already does this. So we actually do monitor the driver's compliance, and we will alert the driver before they go into violation and while they're in violation. Unassigned driving time and miles. So this is something that we already do. When a driver does not log into the ELD solution and starts to drive the vehicle, we actually have advisory messages. Please log in. Please pull over and log in. So there are messages, visual and audible messages to the driver to let them know. We also have something called an unknown driver on the system. And you can currently pull reports and things like that on the back end to see when a vehicle was driven without a driver being logged in, the distance traveled, the time traveled, things like that. Automatic duty status changing, it was not addressed. There were never really any criteria for what these automatic duty status changes would do. Now in the ELD mandate, they specify that the ELD will switch to on duty, not driving, when the CMV has not been in motion for 5 consecutive minutes. At this mark, the ELD will give a pop-up message saying, this vehicle has been detected to not be moving. Would you still like to remain on drive? For an additional minute, if there's no action by the driver, then the ELD switches you over to on duty. The ELD must switch to drive after reaching a speed of 5 miles per hour. So as soon as that speed is hit, it has to switch you over to drive status. Communication methods. This is something that wasn't addressed. Right now, as we stand today, an AOBRD just has to have a display that can be shown to an officer. Now with the ELD mandate, there's 2 options to transfer your logs over to a DOT officer. There's the telematics approach, where as a minimum, the ELD must transfer data via both wireless web services and email. And then there's another option, which is the local transfer. As a minimum, the ELD must transfer data via both USB 2.0 and Bluetooth. So as the ELD vendor, we have 2 options to go with, either the telematics approach or the local transfer approach. Now, regardless of what approach we, Geotab Drive, or another vendor goes with, both types of ELDs must be capable of displaying a standardized compliance page. So this would be the graph grid, the duty status changes, the header, to a DOT officer on the display or on a printout. Resistance to tampering, it was never really defined too well. They had a very vague sentence saying that the AOBRD support system must be, to the maximum extent, practical and tamper-proof. Now there's a lot more checks and balances that we need to do as a vendor to ensure that there isn't any tampering of this data. Identification of sensor failures and edited data. Again, a very vague sentence, must identify sensor failures and edited data. Now they really dig deeper. There's a lot more things that we need to record and monitor, and we need to be able to detect malfunctions and data inconsistencies and record these occurrences as well. Getting into the functional specifications, automatic setting of duty status to driving. The ELD must automatically report driving time when the vehicle is in motion by setting the duty status to driving for the driver, unless there's two special categories. There's personal conveyance and yard moves. If a driver indicates off-duty status and then indicates personal use of CMV, so this was personal conveyance, the duty status must remain off-duty even though the vehicle is in motion until the driver indicates that the driving condition has ended. With yard moves, the driver would hit the on-duty button, specify that they're doing a yard move, and in this case, the duty status will remain on duty, not driving, until the driver indicates that the driving condition has ended. And both of these special categories do not count towards the driver's total hours, meaning this won't give them less drive time, this won't take away from the amount of work that they're allowed to do by law. With personal conveyance, the FMCSA is very particular on driver privacy. When a driver indicates personal conveyance, we as an ELD vendor will need to record the GPS coordinate, but only to 1 decimal digit. What this means is this reduces the accuracy to a radius of approximately 10 miles. So we want to sort of know where the driver is, but not the exact address. Integrally synchronized. So I kind of dug into this before. What that means is we need to be able to read the engine's power status, vehicle's motion status, miles driven, and engine hours. And this is something the telematics device, the black box, the Go device already does. CMVs older than model year 2000 are exempted. Now, just on that note, although they are exempted, there are certain conditions, and this might be third-party devices or sensors that you install on the vehicle to make it ELD compliant, and this would be totally on a voluntary basis. But it is possible for a driver to have an ELD solution on a commercial motor vehicle that is pre-2000, provided that you meet these technical constraints. The certification process. The ELD must be certified by the provider, but the FMCSA will develop a standard set of compliance test procedures that providers may use in their certification process. So it's not a must, it's not mandatory, but this is something that Geotab will definitely be doing. Data entry when the CMV is moving. The current AOBRD regulations do allow minimal keystroke sequences to be used while the CMV is in motion. This was done for things like IFTA. Now with the ELD mandate, they state that an ELD must not allow a driver to access it unless the CMV is stopped. So this is something that we proactively did in Geotab Drive. We already have the capability of automatically creating an IFTA report, so we don't need the driver to do any manual inputs on our device, and we have something called a lock screen that comes up that doesn't allow a driver to access it. Enforcement procedure and transmitting data. The ELD needs to be transferred over to an authorized safety official at a motor carrier's facility or as part of a roadside inspection or review. The ELD must provide a graph grid either on a display or a printed, or as I mentioned before, one of the two communication methods. The FMCSA is going to have something called an EROS software system, and they're currently developing this to receive, analyze, and display the ELD data in a standardized format. Editing and annotating records of duty status. The FMCSA is going to take something called a shift log approach to records. The idea is once a record has been created using the ELD, it must not be erased and driving time records must not be changed. If a driver does do an edit, they must annotate the ELD record and enter any missing information. The driver edits must be accompanied by an annotation, as I mentioned, and the ELD must prompt the driver to annotate their edits. Unidentified drivers. So we have something called the unknown driver entity within our system, which really refers to the operation of a commercial motor vehicle featuring an ELD without an authenticated driver logging in the system. So there's certain things that we need to do. One is an audible and visual reminder to the driver to stop and log in. And the other is to record accumulated driving and on-duty time and present this to the next driver upon login. And these records will also be sent to a DOT officer as well during a roadside inspection. And that's really to see the total activity on the commercial motor vehicle. Account creation. Each user of the ELD must have a valid account of the ELD. And there's certain things that need to be part of this account creation process. One is the license number, and the other is the state or jurisdiction for license. The vehicle models must be monitored on the engine ECM, which is part of the odometer message broadcast. And this is the information that's going to be used to compile the total vehicle miles. So this is something we already do within Geotab Drive. Engine hours, so this is something that's going to be added in. Engine hours need to be monitored and recorded as part of all these different snapshots. So driver's manual entries, the ELD must prompt the driver to input information in the ELD only when it's stationary. So as I mentioned, currently in our system, when the driver is driving the vehicle, we have something called the lock screen coming up, and we don't allow the driver to do anything. Once the vehicle is stopped, that's when we unlock that lock screen, and we then allow the driver to use our solution. Now, one exception to this whole thing about the ELD not being accessible during the vehicle being in motion is co-drivers. So an ELD must allow an authenticated co-driver who is not driving to go in and look over their logs and use the ELD system. However, the ELD must not allow co-drivers to switch driving roles when the vehicle is in motion. So these are things we already have in Geotab Drive. We allow a co-driver to go in when the vehicle is in motion, but they can't switch their driving roles. Driver's entry of required event data fields. So an ELD must provide a means for a driver to manually enter information pertaining to driver's ELD records such as CMV, power unit number, trailer number, and shipping document number. These fields are automatically populated by the motor carrier's ELD system. The driver should be able to override that and make any corrections when necessary. So this is something we already have under the assets portion of Geotab Drive. We have exactly this: the power unit number, the trailer number, and the shipping document number. And this is editable by the driver. Driver's certification of records. So if any edits are necessary after the driver certifies the records for a given 24-hour period, the ELD must require and prompt the driver to recertify the updated records. If you're familiar with Geotab Drive, we have something called verifying logs, and that's exactly this. If the back office, so the carrier, goes in and makes any edits, it comes back to the ELD and it asks the driver to recertify their logs. So we do the same thing. When an edit is made, it comes back to Geotab Drive and we ask the driver to verify the log again. Driver's record entry / edit. So this is really, an ELD must allow the driver to review the duty status logs and make any edits and annotate those edits when necessary. So this is something that's going to be coming into Geotab Drive. We're going to need the driver to be able to make these edits. And another thing is there's actually going to be two categories of edits. One is the carrier edit and the other is driver edits. The FMCSA is very particular on the driver having control over their own duty status logs. So if a carrier edit is made, the driver has the ability to either accept or reject the edits. Here's an example of a full day record. So up here at the top, you'll see a header with a lot of pertaining information like US DOT number, the driver license number, the power unit number, things like that. There's the graph grid display, and right below that are the duty status change logs. Over here, you'll see that there's not only duty statuses, but there's also other snapshots. So there's the power up event, intermediate location, when the driver logged out, things like that. And if you look at this is actually very similar to our compliance print as it stands today. So this is exactly what's going to be used, and this will be what will be sent. This is what will be sent to an officer, either on a display or a printout, or as an output file. When do I have to comply by? So there's actually three different phases. As we stand today, I get asked this question a lot. Do I have to have an ELD today? Do I have to? Am I out of compliance if I don't have one? The answer to that is no. Phase 1 is all the way until December 18, 2017. In phase 1, the driver can use paper logs, logging software, so this could be like a third-party app that drivers can find, and they can record their duty statuses manually. There's AOBRD solutions and ELDs. So during this phase, you can use any one of these four options. Now, as we stand today, there is no such thing as an ELD. Everybody is prepping up to meet the ELD requirements, but until the registration is opened up by the FMCSA, which is going to be on February 16th, there is no such thing as an ELD. There's something called an AOBRD, and that's what is compliant today. Now, phase 2 is the phased-in compliance phase. In this phase, AOBRDs that were installed prior to December 18, 2017 are allowed to be used. And they can be used all the way through until December 16, 2019. The other option is an ELD. Phase 3 is the full compliance phase. So after December 16, 2019, all drivers and carriers subject to the rule must use certified registered ELDs that comply with requirements of the ELD regulations. So as we stand today, AOBRD can be used, and it can be used all the way through until December 16, 2019, provided you install it before December 18, 2017. After December 16, 2019 is when there will be only one solution that will be acceptable, and that's an ELD. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, everyone.